Okay, so now we're going to leave the networking layer for a moment. We'll get back to that later on when we get into gory details of IP addressing and subnet masks. And now we're going to look a little bit more at the transport layer. Let's start with the user datagram protocol because it's so much easier to explain than TCP. So we can see here the predominant protocols used by IP at the transport layer are the transmission control protocol and the user datagram protocol. Let's start with UDP. UDP creates datagrams. It is connectionless. I mentioned that already towards the beginning of today. It does not concern itself with verifying if the destination exists or getting any kind of acknowledgments for data that has been sent. UDP doesn't care about that. So when you take some data and you put it into a UDP header, basically UDP just populates it with 4 fields. Pretty simple. The UDP source port number and destination port number. Now remember, the source port number is typically an ephemeral port, some random port that's come up with. And the destination port number would be a reserved port number, something reserved for whatever the protocol is that we're talking about. And then we have a length field and a checksum. Now I've got 3 examples here of common UDP port numbers that you should memorize for the exam and for other purposes. So one would be TFTP, the Trivial File Transfer Protocol, TFTP, that uses UDP port 69. DNS, we've also talked about that, uses UDP port 53. Now DNS actually technically can also operate with TCP, but you're not going to see that very often. DNS is usually thought of as a UDP protocol, but it can operate with TCP. But most of the time we think of DNS as UDP-based port 53. And then lastly, RIP, the Routing Information Protocol, one of the very first routing protocols that was ever developed. That rides inside of a UDP header, and that uses UDP port number 520, 520.